Um, First and foremost, I want to thank all of you for coming today. This is really an amazing opportunity to have our second HSP Exchange. The first one was, of course, with Dr. Claudio Cabralais, and we're glad to have today Dr. Ahida Pilarski to join us. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Machado, who's going to give us a little bit more background about our speaker today and about all the amazing things the HSP is doing. As many of you know, Dr. Machado has been the director of the HSP for 7 years. Is that correct, Dr. Machado?
That is correct. Mm-hmm.
7 excellent years. And under her leadership, we've had such a growth and expansion, including new programming such as the Latinx Discernment Workshop, of which some of the students here have participated in. The HSP Exchange, of course, our pedagogy workshop for our faculty, which some of the faculty in this very room have participated in as well. We've gotten many grants, including the ones that facilitated this work here. So there's really a moment of robust expansion for the HSP, and a lot of that, the majority of that is thanks to Dr. Machado's excellent leadership. And on top of that, I'll just say that she's also an excellent mentor and leader, leading me all the way to the finish line. So I'm of my degree. So I'm really grateful for her on so many levels. So Dr. Machado, it's all yours now.
Thank you, Jorge. And yes, and I think just before we get started, buenas noches, everybody. Good to see all of you. Just feel my arms around you. Just feel it right there. Un abrazo grande, fuerte a cada uno de ustedes. So good to see you. It's really a joy. And tonight we have a chance to celebrate that Jorge defended his dissertation last week. So Dr. Rodriguez is here with us, which is great. So congratulations to Jorge, who is also a great asset to the HSP. It's so wonderful to see you. And for those, just kind of talk a little bit about the HSP. Though many of you here, I'm glad to see faculty who taught before, folks who are on the board. It's just so great to have you all here. Students, as I said, who are registered for the June session, our 32nd. So it's all good to see you. We're really delight to have this community. Estamos juntos, somos familia. We're together as a community of faith, but also as a community of struggle. Y como decía nuestra compañera Isa Silvia, la vida es lucha. And so we're here together with one another to support one another. As you know, the HSP was launched in 1989. And the idea was to create a space for Latinx seminarians to receive classes from Latinx professors in a pedagogical environment that would be focused on the Latinx reality in the United States. And now, 32 years later, we have over 1,500 students that have sat in the HSP classes over these years, and over 150 professors who have taught in the HSP. And this June, as I said, our 32nd session will be our second session online. So we're getting very good at this. So that means that we're going to expand some programming and be able to offer some online classes. And we'll talk about that and announce that in the coming future. But what about the exchange? Why are these exchanges important? Why did we launch these? Well, we understand that the reality of the United States, a very diverse and complicated reality of the United States, and what we're living through, and we have been living through in the last years. We understand the need to enlarge and broaden the conversation between communities, to engage others who want to be a part of conversations and the topics that we're going to focus on in this series. As Jorge said, this is our second, and we want to continue them throughout the entire year. We understand that the diverse context of this nation requires the HSP to build bridges of dialogue and understanding with many other communities also living in this nation, in order to bring into the public square a clear conversation about justice and belonging, and the work that we need to do together to make this nation a better place. And we're going to do this through the exchanges, in the exchanges, from the place that the HSP knows the best, which is by using a theological and a Latinx lens. This is why the presence of each of you is so very important, so meaningful to the work that we want to do and what your presence symbolizes for the work of the HSP and for the future of our community, the future of the academy in which we participate as well, the churches that we serve, the communities where we belong. And I'm delighted that you have joined us tonight. I also want to thank our co-hosts. We have 3 co-hosts representing some of our sponsoring institutions who have been a part of joining us tonight and supporting us. Dr. Deborah Juncker, who is from Garrett Evangelical Seminary in Evanston, Illinois. We have Francisco Lozada from Bright Divinity School in Fort Worth, Texas. And our third co-host for the event was Scott Woodward, the president of the Oblate School of Theology in San Antonio. And we are delighted for the support that we receive from our sponsoring schools, and especially for their work as co-hosts and support of this venture. This is an opportunity for us to come together, and who else for this second conversation to lead us but wonderful Ahida Pilarski. She is a professor of Old Testament of Hebrew Bible. She is also the chair of the Theology department at Saint Anselm College. Her research focuses on the intersection of culture and gender in biblical interpretation, and she is especially working on developing a Latina biblical hermeneutics and a mujerista biblical hermeneutics. And some of you here are registered for her class in June. So this is just a treat for you to get to enjoy listening to Dr. Pilarski. And her course this summer at the HSP will present some of her recent work in this area. Dr. Pilarski also serves as the steering committee of the Hispanic Theological Initiative and on the committee for underrepresented minorities in the profession in the Society for Biblical Literature. She is also a member of the board of the Academy of Hispanic Theologians, known as ACTUS, and is a member of the editorial board for the Wisdom Commentary series. She is editing 4 volumes in that series, and 2 of them have been published already, the one on Judges and 2 Kings. So who better tonight to lead us in her lecture in honor of Mother's Day, in honor of all the mujeres, all the women across the United States, las Latinas, as she talks about the intersection of gender, Latinidad, and biblical hermeneutics. Ahida, we welcome you and we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Daisy, and thank you all. And just a second, I had a window that appeared in the middle of my screen. I'm going to be using a PowerPoint just to make the presentation clear or more clear, because some of the points I'm trying to make are a bit complex. So let me just set that up, and then I have a few words to say about HSP and Daisy, and I'll move to my presentation. All right. So as I said, I want to begin by saying thank you to Dr. Daisy Machado for inviting me to be or to present in the inaugural series of the HSP Exchange. From the first time I personally met Dr. Machado at the HSP in 2018, I noticed immediately her courageous spirit, which energized every person she met and the HSP program itself. With her courageous and caring spirit, she creates and builds a climate of belonging and trust for all at HSP. Dr. Machado is indeed a leader in theological education, as a theologian, as an administrator, and as a person of faith. My participation in the HSP, thanks to this spirit and climate, is like a homecoming experience. At HSP, I am really able to bring new ideas and concerns that relate to realities for our Latinx communities. And also I am able to learn from the wisdom of students, faculty, and staff. These I find essential to my academic growth as a Latina scholar. And it is also a life-giving source to continue my personal commitment to our faith communities. When Dr. Machado asked me to present at this inaugural HSP Exchange, I was really honored. And because it is Dr. Machado, I can never say no. Her leadership at the HSP is essential to advancing our field, and tenemos que apoyarla. She deserves all our support. So with these words, I now can move to the presentation. So it is really an honor to be here with all of you. I have entitled my presentation, Latinas and the Bible, Reclaiming Voices. Before I say something about this title, let me acknowledge this day, Cinco de Mayo. Cinco de Mayo commemorates the Battle of Puebla in 1862, where Mexicans were able to defeat the French colonizers despite being outnumbered 2-1. This event actually sets a good scenario for my presentation because it speaks about overcoming oppressive and colonizing powers, despite being outnumbered. So now, to the title of my presentation. In the title, I have the word reclaiming, and it was meant in the sense of claiming once again. This was inspired by a foundational story at the beginning of the book of Exodus, which narrates the Israelites' experience of oppression in Egypt. The passage is Exodus chapter 2, verse 23. And in Spanish, this passage uses the word clamor. The translation of this passage into English always puzzled me. In Spanish, the term used is clamor, and in English is cry. Ironically, the translation of the word claim in a Spanish-English dictionary includes these three English words: assertion, demand, right, all of which resonate more with the content of the story in Exodus, because there, people are rightfully calling for God to do justice. The Spanish word clamor refers not only to the physical manifestation of pain, but it is mainly a legitimate call to someone, in this case God, to do the right thing in face of an injustice, or in the face of an injustice, I'm sorry. The passage reads, el clamor de su servidumbre subió hasta Dios, y Dios escuchó su clamor, and God listened to their clamor, and the story of liberation began. For those who know Hebrew or Greek, the semantic fields of these two languages also elucidate the power of the Spanish clamor. This title also frames my presentation into three parts. First, I want to say something about the Bible and Latinas, then make a connection to Latinas and biblical studies, and finally, talk about reclaiming voices. In 2014, the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture conducted a survey to study the Bible in American life. I selected 4 important findings relevant for our reflection. The first is that there is a 50-50 split among Americans who read any form of scripture. The second is that the strongest correlation with Bible reading is based on race. In Latinx communities, 46% read the Bible on a regular basis. If we were to consider our Black sisters and brothers, these percentages are very telling about the centrality of the Bible for these minoritized communities. The third finding identifies the main reason for reading the scriptures, and that is personal prayer and devotion. Finally, the survey indicates that in the general practice of reading the Bible, women outnumber men. Many of our Latina scholars have been already writing about these practices of prayer and devotion among Latinas. Here I want to cite a few words from the book Latina Evangelicals, a theological survey from the margins, co-authored by Loida Martel, Zaida Maldonado, and Elizabeth Conde Fraser. In the introduction, Loida Martel says, quote, "Theology doesn't arise just from the specialist in the field. Indeed, it is our claim that evangelicas, and early in the introduction, she names the abuelas, madres, comadres, and tías. So evangelicas are profoundly theological women who reflect on the presence of God and its implications in the spaces of the everyday," close quote. So the wisdom of our abuelas, madres, comadres, and tías, despite being marginalized and minoritized voices, have remained very alive in our communities, as the survey indicates. As the number of Latina scholars joining academia increases, the academy is beginning to hear, and at times listen, more and more to the voices and wisdom of Latinas. Latent in their voices, however, are also their clamores, their claims in the everyday, en lo cotidiano. According to all socioeconomic indicators of health and well-being, even before the pandemic, Black and brown peoples in this country were already struggling disproportionately. The pandemic just uncovered these pre-existing inequities. Unfortunately, studies are showing that the compounding nature of the crisis created by the pandemic is affecting disproportionately Black and Latina women. Even a term has been coined, she-cession, to refer to the coming recession for these particular groups. In focusing on the realities of Latinas, I am calling it a ya-cession. Women account for 53.5% of the net job loss during the pandemic. Latinas unemployment peaked at 20.1% in April of 2020. 6 in 10 reported that someone in their families lost employment. 21.5% report not having enough food. 29.4% of Latinas were behind on their rent. And according to the US Department of Health and Human Services report released in February of this year, Latinx people show the highest percentages of depression, suicidal thoughts, and increased substance abuse or use. So how to speak about God in these realities? How to listen to the clamores of the people for whom the Bible is essential to their faith and life. Clearly, according to the survey, the Bible is accompanying many of the Latinas as they struggle to survive in these oppressive realities of their everyday, in lo cotidiano. How about biblical studies? Is it accompanying the people of God? Let me move to the second point. The SBL, the largest association of biblical scholars founded in 1880, 141 years ago, has adopted not too long ago an adequate practice of accountability, a profile report. The 2019 report indicates that Latinas constitute only the 0.0007% of the total of the total membership. This is less than 10% of the 1%. So of a total of 8,324 respondents, 96 were Latinx with faculty positions. And of these 96, only 5 were Latinas. This report is from 2019, meaning that these inequities were also a pre-existing condition before the pandemic. So I'm looking forward to analyzing the 2020 report to see the impact of the pandemic. 5 Latinas. This reality makes it really difficult to bring the voices of Latinas to the academy. We are clearly outnumbered. Let's look now at the current state of the field of biblical studies, where Latinas are not only outnumbered in numbers, but also epistemologically outnumbered. That is, outnumbered in their ways of knowing. Given the time constraints and the complexity of what is going on in this field, let me do a metaphorical exercise. I want you to imagine 3 realms: air, water, land. Here, I am not claiming this imagery as an exhaustive representation of realms. You could legitimately think of others, but for the purpose of this exercise, I want you to keep this image in mind. Most current methods and approaches in biblical studies are based on Western European theories of text interpretation, mainly influenced by Western European philosophical hermeneutics, from Schleiermacher in the 18th century, all the way to Gadamer, Habermas, Ricord, and Levinas. These methods are categorized according to their focus on the world behind the text, the world of the text, and the world in front of the text. And I am not against these methods. They can continue to be used. The field of biblical studies has gained a significant amount of information through these methods, and that is great. However, these methods reflect only one particular realm. So let me illustrate that. On top, on the air realm, I have placed a graphic that represents the current methods used in biblical studies. Now, notice the small sky boxes in the bottom two realms, water and land. This means that even though we are under the impression that by using the methods of the sky box in other realms or contexts, there is diversity of methods. That is not the case. Dr. Fernando Segovia, the first Latino president of the SBL, in his presidential address in November of 2014, entitled Criticism in Critical Times, Reflections on Vision and Task, called the SBL to consider the importance of rethinking biblical interpretation through the lenses of paradigms. Segovia advanced a seventh paradigm, which he named the global systemic paradigm, where he claims that, quote, the premises of the epistemologies of the South provide a much broader understanding of the world, broader than that of the West, close quote. So again, let me illustrate that. Fernando Segovia, from a Latinx perspective or realm, have been reflecting for at least 3 decades on the larger frameworks that paradigms provide for theorizing. In this slide, I'm illustrating paradigms through diverse shapes and colors, locating them in different realms, some even in intersecting realms. Let me go back to Segovia's seventh paradigm. He says that it is only, quote, through such a plurality of knowledges, grounded in their own historical trajectories, and not the universal history of the West, that a vision of utopia arises for the future of the world, close quote. So let me add one more layer of complexity to take us to the third and last point. Reclamando and decolonizing. I believe that as a field, and I'm speaking about theology and biblical studies in particular, we are already visualizing the particular horizons of the Western European realm. And here, I want to introduce the concept of decolonization. Decolonial thinking, which has been emerging from the epistemologies of the Global South, is providing elements to navigate the plurality of paradigms. Maldonado Torres explains that, I quote, decolonization should be seen as a project whose objective consists in expanding the practices and forms of decolonized thought and action to try and shape a new world in which many worlds fit. Such a world will comprise various ways of understanding subjectivity, community, and institutions, which will seek to give consistent expression to the sharpest articulations of interrelationality and human coexistence from diverse epistemic worlds, including both European modernity and the forms of thought it has colonized, close quote. And it is important to know that a decolonial term, Maldonado Torres adds, begins with, quote, the emergence of consciousness about colonization as a fundamental problem, and to decolonizing thought at a global level. Finally, this is the utopia that I envision for Latinas and for all minoritized voices and subjugated knowledges. This vision calls for reclaiming, decolonizing, decentralizing, democratizing biblical studies, theology, and all fields in academia. The good news is that this is already happening, despite being outnumbered. I would even argue that HSP is a decolonizing project in theological education. It has gained a level of spatiality that fosters a diversity of Latinx epistemologies, allowing them to advance the plurality of knowledges that Segovia speaks about in the seventh paradigm. And for being part of this spatiality, I am forever grateful. Notice the decentering of realms, with the sky no longer at the top. allowing for the plurality of paradigms and realms. This is the kind of theological education that our current and future students will need to reconnect to the realities of our flesh and blood communities. Gracias.